Welcome, everyone. Are we starting
Why not?
officially? Yes? Okay. I'm Carol Becker. Very happy to be here. I'm Dean of Columbia University School of the Arts. And it is more than an honor and more than a joy to get to be with you.
Thank you.
Marin Alsop, you know, but I will tell you anyway. She's an American conductor and a violinist. And she is currently music director of the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra and conductor of honor of the Sao Paulo State Symphony Orchestra and chief conductor of the Vienna Radio Symphony Orchestra and so many other things. She's really one of the most renowned conductors in the world. She travels extensively, conducting, teaching, advocating for diverse youth groups and for orchestras composed of youth, as you saw last night, and for women conductors in particular. Those of you who were at the International Call for Unity and Joy concert last night, I think will agree that it was one of the great experiences of our lives. And I say this as someone whose plane was 5 hours late and who was on the Davos bus while the concert was happening and watching it on my phone and weeping. I told Marin, I'm in the bus and I was just weeping. It was so beautiful. With the European Union Youth Orchestra and the choir of the Sao Paulo Symphony and soloists from so many different countries, it was just a statement about what the arts can do, what music can do, what humans can do together. It was, so my first question, or my first topic to talk about, I live in a world of many art forms, theater and visual art, writing. But I have always thought, even though it's not my expertise, that music of all forms was the most immediate to the human organism, that we respond to music. It comes right into our bodies, right into our senses, right into our spirit, more directly than any other form, and also translates across culture more directly and more immediately. So I just, as someone who's spent her life living it, I just thought I'd start there and ask you your thinking on that.
Sure. Well, I think that we're all born hot-wired for music. You know, when people say to me, well, oh, I'm tone deaf, you know, or I can't carry tune, or I can't sing, I really want to go back with them in history to that person that told them that, because that is not true. Every single human being can sing, can feel music. And when people feel sometimes hesitant in coming to enjoy classical music because they don't know enough, they don't feel educated enough. And I say, but that's not, you don't need any education because you're human. So you can experience the beauty of music. And everyone has a song that reminds them of something or a melody, and you're transported. That's, music can connect with us so directly. It's almost like a dream, and transport you to another time in your life or another place or another planet in a way. So my teacher, my mentor, Leonard Bernstein, if you ever watch him, he did the Norton Lectures at Harvard, and he postulated that the first human word was not spoken, it was sung. And I agree, and when you think about kids, they're always intoning. Language comes from singing, really. You don't just suddenly speak a word. You have to, you have to really work it through a lot. So I think music is just, it's part of being human. So I think that's why it's able to transcend those boundaries.
What you said just now is so correct, that music can take you back in time. It can move you to sometimes very painful things and sometimes very joyful things.
Sure.
And there are times when you just can't listen to something because it reminds you of people or a time in your life or a loss. It's just so, it goes right to pain. And then there's music that the minute you hear it, everything seems to go away and you just feel elated. I always think that music somehow defies gravity in a way, that it's like grace. It just takes the weightiness
and
away.
you think about when you were a teenager, or if you have teenage kids, that music is it's a rebellion. It's a way of expressing yourself. It's a way of uniting you with your peers. So, I mean, it's a very, very, very powerful medium, I think.
And a way of making you feel that you're not young anymore when you can't relate to the music of a particular new generation, when you think, wow, I can't hear this.
I don't get it, right.
I get it, or I don't get it, but I don't want to get it, or something about you just resists it. You know, it's like, whoa, why is this happening now?
Yeah, definitely.
You've spoken about when you went to a Leonard Bernstein concert before he became your mentor and friend, and you were with your father, who was a musician, and you just knew, I want to do that. I want to be a conductor. So I'm curious, like, what you saw that made you think, that's what I want to do.
You know, it's I'm always amazed at the musicians that come from. I have a very good friend who grew up on a turkey farm, and she plays the viola. Now, I don't know how you get from a turkey farm to playing the viola. That to me is really, that's something magical. I was born, both of my parents were professional musicians. So, they didn't necessarily want a child, they needed a pianist. So that's why I was born. And so
that's why they had you?
Yeah, they needed a trio, so that was the idea. And I hated the piano. And so, make a long story short, I retired from piano when I was 6, and then they tricked me into playing the violin. But luckily, I loved playing the violin. And that made me also understand that for every child, there is an instrument. So if you played an instrument growing up, another thing I'd like to go back with you, and it didn't click, it's because it wasn't your instrument. I really believe that's true.
It was true of the accordion for me, I have to say.
Well, it's probably a relief for everyone around you too, but
that was the Polish thing.
And I loved playing the violin, and I got pretty good. And when I was about 8, I was in Juilliard pre-college. No pressure from my parents. And I loved playing in the orchestra. I loved the sound, but the director called my parents in because everyone was complaining about some little kid in the back of the second violins who was trying to lead the whole orchestra. So, I was already thinking, oh, this classical music thing is just not going to work out for me. It's so many rules to follow, even for me then. And luckily, my dad took me to a concert shortly thereafter. I think I was about 9 years old, and the guy came out to conduct, and he was wearing a turtleneck, which I thought, oh, that's different. And then he turned around and started talking to us about the music and sharing, why we should listen to this piece, what was interesting about it. And that was really interesting to me. And then he turned around and started jumping around like a crazy person. And I thought, oh, I can be the conductor and not get in any trouble and have fun. So that was it for me. I was sold. And that was Leonard Bernstein who was conducting.
Who then you worked with very much, right?
Yeah, I mean, I eventually became his student, but he was my hero. I had 2 posters on my wall, a big one of Leonard Bernstein and then a smaller one of the Beatles. So that was my musical, inclination. And it's ironic because Bernstein loved the Beatles. And one night when I was on tour with him, he played every single Beatles song for me. He knew every word at the piano. I wish, before cell phones, I wish I had but I have it at least in my head.
There's a video somewhere that I watched when I was trying to learn more about you, and he rushes you. You're very young and you're conducting, and he rushes up on the stage.
Oh yeah, when I finish and he runs up.
I thought, oh, I held my breath because I thought, did he knock you over almost? I mean, he was like, just came on the stage right at the very end.
He would not done well in the Me Too moment, I mean, he had no sense of personal space at all whatsoever. He was like, he'd be coming, everybody would be like, look out, here he comes. Wait, no kisses, okay. Yeah, he was crazy.
To jump up on the stage, all right.
Yeah, that's wild.
Okay, so now, you do a lot of master classes for women conductors, and I think they're fascinating. And if any of you are interested in this topic at all, you should watch them, because I learned a lot, just conceptually, about conducting from watching you. And what I was so interested in particularly was with one woman conductor, where you stand next to her and you make her breathe with you. That she's not breathing correctly. So I wish to just talk about that because it made me think, well, if the orchestra is an organism functioning together, is the conductor the breath, the lungs? Is the conductor the head, the brain? Like, it's such an interesting idea that if you're not breathing, then maybe the orchestra can't breathe. But I just wanted you to talk about that.
Conducting is it's such an abstract thing because no matter how much I wave my arms, I make no sound, and so it's completely dependent on trying to enable the people around me to be the best they can be.
But the minute you lift your arm,
well, usually
starts.
Something happens.
Yes.
Yeah. Whether it's good or I can't, that's something to debate. But it's all about body language. I mean, that's the first thing, gesture. And I can watch 5 young conductors, and any of you could do it too. It would be clearly obvious with the same piece, same orchestra, and I guarantee you could also tell. It sounds completely different. And it's because of the way they move, the way they breathe, the way it's very individualistic, very dependent on all of those things. And so breathing is important because if you're going to invite someone to play that is playing a wind instrument or brass instrument, if you don't breathe, the sound is tight. And if your gesture is harsh, the sound is also harsh. And the musicians aren't necessarily even aware of this, but you can hear it. And so, I mean, it's a complex thing. And then, of course, when you add the societal interpretation of gesture from women, which is very different from the same gesture from a man is interpreted very differently than it is from a woman. So, when my female students will come and conduct and, sort of dainty like that, I say, oh, no, you can't do that. Because then it's girly or it's lightweight or whatever. But when a guy does that, it's sensitive. I mean, I have no judgment on it. It's just the way society looks at things differently. And when a woman, really wants to get a big sound, there's a line that if you cross everybody, it's like, you're called the B word. So you have to really figure out.
Does that translate into all languages?
Yes, I think so. I don't know. In German, it might be but I think so. It's very interesting, and also it's always every day is something new because the organism constantly changes. I work with a different orchestra almost every week, so it's a different being.
Why do you think there is so much resistance, or has been historically, to women as conductors? Is it like women directors of film where it's just a leadership issue that men just simply don't want women at the helm? Or do you think there's something intrinsic to the nature of music, classical music?
Oh, no. I really think it's a comfort level. I mean, I'm always asked this question. Of course, my response usually is, well, I'm probably not the right person to ask. You should ask some of the men that question, because for me, I want to promote women in this field. But I think that as a society, it takes a long time for us to be comfortable with roles, especially with different looking people in roles. I mean, I try to think back when I was growing up, when I was a kid, it was always 2 white guys on TV anchoring the news. That's what it was. And then sort of gradually, like this one woman, Barbara Walters, she came in, and that was really uncomfortable for a while. And then we got over that and they let Jane Pauley through. You know what I mean? So a couple women, and then everybody got comfortable with one man, one woman. Then it morphed, so that we saw more people of color and this and that. And now I think it just takes volume of seeing people in certain roles to become
change.
Comfortable. But from my perspective, I assumed naively that there would be a lot more women coming into my field as I was going. But then 5 years passed, and 10 years, 15 years, I said, well, this is ridiculous. And if I don't do something about it, who will change this landscape? So in 2002, I started a fellowship for women conductors. And I named it after my non-musical mentor, the gentleman that helped me start my first orchestra, Tomi Otaki. He owned Anne Klein Clothing. He was not in music at all. He didn't even like classical music, actually. But
He liked you.
For some reason. And he supported the orchestra. And so this fellowship has really, I think, helped quite a lot, because it's very important that the women, conducting isn't like anything else. You can't practice it unless you have 20 or 40 friends that come over every day. There's no instrument. So,
And a large apartment.
yeah, you need a lot of beer and pizza. Yeah, but so that's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
So you can't get opportunities, and the most important thing to me is that you have to have the chance to fail in order to become successful. And if you only have one chance, it doesn't go well.
Well,
usually.
especially in a profession where it's not predisposed to want you to succeed necessarily, so it becomes even more difficult to fail in public.
There's that, yeah.
There's that. Talk also about, you're changing the profession in so many ways, sort of its activist part of your life, and it's a totality in your life, which makes it even more wonderful. Can you talk about the youth orchestras and what you've been thinking about that, and what motivated that, and then we'll watch a small clip of Sao Paulo.
Oh, sure. Well, I think it goes back to this, when I had to play the piano and I hated the piano, that's part of it. Wanting every kid to have the opportunity to learn a musical instrument and learn an instrument that they liked. And also, I'm motivated by wanting to see the same diversity on stage that I see in my community. And that's definitely missing in the orchestras, because not every child has the same opportunity to access, playing an instrument. So when I went to Baltimore in 2007, I thought, why don't we try to start a program that can give access to these young kids, and especially in West Baltimore. And so I started with 30 kids in one school, and now we have 2,000 kids playing musical instruments. And our very first class has just graduated from high school. It's just graduating from high school. And our first orchid, it's called Orchestra Kids, Orchid. Our first orchid was accepted, I couldn't believe it, to the Hart School of Music on the flute. I thought it would take generations, for it to really sink in. And she sent me a note a couple days ago that she loved school, and she sent me her grades in the email because she made the honor roll, the president's list. And, to me, this is really important. When I see these kids playing, I realize that, it's all about access.
Right.
That's all it is. Every kid has this capacity. Every human being has this capacity. Mm-hmm. And it's so unfortunate that we, as a society, can't create equal opportunity for everyone. So
let's watch this clip of the Sao Paulo Orchestra.
I'm not sure what this is. Is this about the Ode to Joy project?
Yes,
okay.
And we're gonna shift over to that amazing project, which is actually really brings together, I think, everything that we've been talking about and everything you've been doing. Just strikes me as one of the most fabulous projects I've heard about almost ever. So are you going to do it? Okay, it's just a minute.
This is a little snapshot, yeah.
I want to, I'd like to talk about this project because it's so astounding to me, the symbolism of the Ninth Symphony, and the way that it has always been conjured in so many different situations, in the fall of the Berlin Wall and Tiananmen Square. I mean, so many times when people want to talk about freedom, they think about that. So I wanted to ask you, like, where this idea to make this global ode to joy and for Beethoven's this 250th, even where did it even come from? How did it begin as an idea? And
Well, I think that for me, the themes, Beethoven as a human being is symbolic for me of all that I aspire to. I mean, someone who suffered. I mean, he knew in his early 20s that he was losing his hearing. And he knew, certainly by the time he was 30 years old, that it was going to be a very slow, progressive, inevitable process. And I can't imagine, can you imagine losing the one thing that makes you complete in that kind of painful way? And of course, he went through a period of tremendous depression and even wrote a suicide note and to his brothers, and somehow found a reason to exist and stay alive. And he refused any kind of treatment, and anything that would cloud his creative capacity. He wouldn't go near. And he found the will to really push through this and find more inner strength and start to hear internally, his own world. And this is why I really believe that this is why he was able to transcend any other composer, because he wasn't judging it anymore. It was all created internally. And so by the time he writes his Ninth Symphony, there's a legendary story that he was conducting, and I guess it was a disaster because everybody just said, just don't look up and you'll be all right. Don't look at the conductor. He was, because he couldn't hear anything. So, but at the end of the piece, the mezzo-soprano had to turn him around so that he could see the ovation because he couldn't hear it. And everyone in the audience then realized that he was completely deaf. And to write this music under that circumstance, and also to always, all of his pieces have the same subtext. It's just like any author, you write different novels, but they all have the same themes always because we are who we are. Mm. And his themes are about hope and optimism and unity and joy and the things that connect, also because I think he felt so isolated as an individual because he was cut off from everybody. And he longed for that connection. And this is a piece about connection. It's about, of course, the themes are about joy. And the Schiller text, which was written in the late 1700s, but he went back to that text because it had this theme of joy, and the idea of freedom was really an important concept, particularly at that moment, when you weren't allowed to really think about this. So also I have to say that when the Berlin Wall came down and my mentor, Bernstein, was there and gathered an orchestra from around the world and a choir from around the world and changed the word Freude, joy, to Freiheit, freedom. I thought, this is emblematic of what Beethoven would have wanted. And I think that all of these things together made me think about creating a Beethoven Ninth Symphony with a text on the same themes, but texts that would resonate with different cultures. So this is in Portuguese, so it may not resonate so well, but when we did it in Sao Paulo, I could see the connection. And maybe last night you could see the connection that the choir had to the text because it's their language. When we do it in Baltimore, I've had a friend who's a rap artist named Wordsmith. So we have a text by a rap artist. When we do it in Africa, it's going to be in Zulu.
I know, it's
when
so
we do it
incredible.
in Carnegie Hall, it's by the former poet laureate of the United States. So the texts change, and also what you don't see from that is that we're adding interstitial music between the movements and before the symphony begins to try to tell the story in a way that really brings it close to the people listening.
It's such an incredible idea because we talked about the Tracy K. Smith text that will be in Carnegie Hall, and the last part of her text is asking forgiveness of the earth from humans. And I think it will bring the house down when people hear it because it's so beautifully written. And this notion that you can take something which is so classical, which is this theme of our whole event, this conversation, and make it so immediate and contemporary and flexible. Because I think the implication of classical is that it's set in some way, historically set, and to take it and show this elasticity and that it can become completely relevant and the allusions to God can be completely transformed by other cultures and other languages. And I think I would love to be there when it's sung in Zulu in South Africa, which is a society that's fought so hard for freedom. It's going to be so moving to people in a way that it would never be if it were sung in German.
But, you know, maybe, I mean, for me, maybe it goes back to being 8 years old and, you know, being told don't have so much fun with classical music. And I also think that Beethoven didn't look at his music as a museum piece. You know, he looked at it as a living, breathing reflection of the time he lived in. And so I hope he's enjoying it.
I think we're done.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much, Carol.
Perfect.